Welcome to Ask the Mayor. I'm Kurt Morris, the mayor of San Dimas. To my right is Blaine Michaelis, who is the city manager of San Dimas. The purpose of this hour that we spend on roughly every other Thursday night is to talk to you about what you might be interested in. If any of you want to call, ask questions, whatever you'd like to do, that's what we're really here for. Just to give the people in San Dimas another opportunity, if they choose to do so, to ask us about what's going on, about anything that you might have questions about, make comments on anything. That's the whole purpose. We do have a program that we will be going through, but please don't feel you're interrupting if you call, because that's the primary purpose for us being here. So Blaine, I know from our conversations today that there are an awful, and from the things that have been going on in the last week or so, there are a lot of things to talk about.
There are.
And one of them, and I don't know if this fits your place to start, but there have been developments on the goal line on financing and otherwise. Maybe you could bring the people who are happen to be listening to us up on the absolute latest with the goal line.
Happy to. Let me back up a couple of months. When the goal line went out for bids to construct the project, which would be from Glendora all the way to Montclair, they opened their bids late last fall. And as they started to process the bids, they found that the bids were 500.
Hello, you're on the air. Thank you for calling.
Hi, Mayor Morris and Blaine. Blaine, this is Pam Stevens. I wanted to ask you to give an explanation of SB 50. I read it, but I don't understand it. So if you could do that, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. SB 50, of course, is in, it has been introduced, but it's introduced by Senator Weiner, who had a similar bill last year that was a lot of compromises and things were made, and it did not make it through. He is now the chairman of the Housing Committee in the Senate, and this is a new bill which met some of the objections that were raised previously. And the purpose of this bill, by what it says its purpose is to do, is to create housing that would be near transit facilities. That means, or it could mean, any major station. It can even mean bus stops along a corridor where buses run as often as every 15 minutes. And this zone, it effectively removes the city's zoning control of the property, if it meets those requirements. And it enables a developer to build rental housing at a density that is far in excess of what the city would otherwise allow. And in fact, we don't have any control over what the density would be. They're limited if they're within a quarter of a mile of a facility, of a transportation facility, meaning a bus stop or of buses that run frequently enough. If they're within a quarter mile, the buildings can be 5-story. They also require very limited parking, much less than we would require under our codes for the same kind of building. If they're within a half a mile, not within a quarter, but within a half a mile of a station, they can only have a maximum of 4-story buildings. But again, the density is whatever they can get, and they don't get it from us. The fine details have not been worked out yet because this is going through committees and everything. But by some definitions, people automatically assume we're talking about the train station. But we have another transportation facility in town, and that's the bus stop at the Park and Ride in San Dimas.
So this could happen on Arrow Highway.
It could. Arrow Highway doesn't have bus routes that but you draw a circle. So you start at that point and you go a quarter of a mile, and if they can be anywhere in that quarter of a mile. It's not just this location that we've been talking about or along the tracks. It's anywhere. And in fact, they could even replace single-family homes in the way that it was before, when it was, I believe, it was 874 or something like that was the bill that never passed. It was never brought to a vote, actually. By many of the definitions, the park and ride, the bus station stop in the park and ride may very well qualify, and in that case, that the property at Bonita and Cataract would be subject to the 5-story limitation. Now, all of this is still not anywhere yet, but I do know, and I talked to a city manager yesterday who was at a meeting in Sacramento with Senator Wiener, and Senator Wiener was very nice about it, and he told these assembled city people who were very concerned about what this would do to local control and to local government in general. And the senator said, we have this very large housing problem in California. We have a particularly large affordable housing problem, and we're going to have to deal with it. And there are a number of ways we're going to try. Senate Bill 35, which passed a year or so ago, it did a lot of these things, and it had nothing to do with transit, with it being near any kind of transit facilities or availability of public transit. And he told them that if people don't come up with other and better solutions, this is going to happen. Akin to that, in another way, is that we have a housing element in San Dimas that has been approved by the state and is good through 2021. But at the end we then will have to submit another application for a housing element for our general plan. At that point, they will look and say, you have not met any of the goals assigned to you. And these goals are assigned by governments, by regional governments, and we had a quota, essentially. In the past, all we had to do was zone property so that it would be possible for somebody to come in and build, in accordance with our zoning, to build high-density residential. Nobody has ever built high-density residential on our areas. The only real major product that we've done for affordable housing is actually a part of the Avalon apartment complex. Some of those units have restricted to low income, the Marshall area, and the redevelopment agency paid Avalon a substantial amount of housing money to essentially buy down those rents for 55 years. We don't have that ability anymore because we don't have a housing authority. Well, now the governor is taking the position that planning is fine, but that if there isn't performance, that is, if there are no low-income housing units built in a jurisdiction that meets our, quote, fair share, that he will take away transportation money. That means the gas tax, that means this SB2, was it, that where they devote it, where we get probably an additional $500,000 a year for streets, and they'll take that away for all cities that don't meet their quota for low and moderate income housing. That's a big challenge. Blaine is going to explain in a few minutes on the goal line. Part of the goal line proposal, or Metro's proposal, is to take away some of our other money that we had planned to use for streets and our infrastructure.
Yes, I wrote you a letter about that.
Senate Bill 50 is an absolute disaster for San Dimas if somebody chose to build And the logical place they would go would be property that is unoccupied, that is not developed. And we do have the property, I think, is the San Dimas property that's most at risk is the property that happens to be owned by the successor agency and is not developed. And they don't, if that applies, our zoning law has nothing to do with it. We can't say you can build 16 units per acre. They can say you can build 80 or whatever they want to do. They just supplant our zoning. So the details of that will be coming.
I have one question. I think I better understand it now, but I have one question, and that is, how do our local representatives, our state assemblymen, state senators in this area, how do they feel about that law?
Well, all of our representatives are Democrats, and the Democratic Party it is significant that the leadership in the Senate removed the person who was the chair of the Housing Committee and replaced him with Senator Weiner. Senator Weiner is a senator from San Francisco, and he is devoted to the idea that we have to deal with the affordable housing crisis and that it's going to have to be dealt with by the state because the cities have not dealt with it. I think you could say that the legislature in general, whole governor, the legislature, they really are not in favor of cities like San Dimas, where you have a large number of single-family zones where houses are built. Some cities that are totally built out are faced with doing this and with having to build or having to provide for building of high density, affordable housing. And what they're told by the state representatives is some of the single family houses will have to be torn down to make room for it. So they really are at war with what has been the kind of cities that our whole plan and everything we've done since we've been incorporated has been to have a balance of housing and some other and commercial and things to try to have the income that we need, but also to have the kind of lifestyle that people in San Dimas come here for. But that is in jeopardy.
San Marino should just love that law.
I beg your pardon?
I said San Marino should just love that law.
Well, I'll tell you, this is happening all over the country. The city of Minneapolis, about a month ago, I believe, did away with single-family zoning throughout the entire city. And that immediately, without any other changes of anything, a single-family lot can be converted to have one house and a duplex or a triplex. Because they think that that's their solution. The state of Oregon is considering that same kind of step throughout the entire state of Oregon. There are some problems because of the CEQA requirements. You can't just, without changing that law, and of course with supermajorities in both houses of the legislature, it is possible that anything can change. But here, CEQA, you have to have hearings and you have got to do all of the environmental things on where you eliminate parking or you say that all the parking is in the streets. It's just, there is just this huge thing going on. It's going on all up and down the West Coast. Seattle is a big area for it too, but the California State Legislature is way ahead of everybody else. And I think, they are determined that high density, affordable housing is going to be built. So I don't know exactly how it's going. I think it's going to adversely affect San Dimas, but I don't It's one thing when we can have statutes, and even if we have to comply with some limits that are, like for zoning property for 30 units per acre, that at least we still had some control. With SB 50, the city has almost no control. So it is a draconian thing, but even the people who talked to Senator Weiner said he understands their concern, but this is a crisis, and they're going to deal with it.
Okay, thank you for the explanation, and I recommend that if it passes, that you not run for mayor.
I think I will not. One thing that, however, there are always these little things that say maybe they're good, maybe they're bad. Even under redevelopment, where you use government money, building housing was exempt from the prevailing wage law, which I think roughly it cost to have, for the city of San Dimas to have something built, cost about 30% more than it would if the prevailing wage law did not apply. Housing was exempt. Housing is not exempt under the Senate Bill 35, Senate Bill 50, maybe not, but because the unions are strong supporters of these same people who are doing these laws, and they want the prevailing wage to apply. Most people who are knowledgeable about building housing said you cannot build housing at prevailing wages and sell it for anything near a reasonable market price. So it may be that the thing that slows down the application of these Senate bills 50, 35, and the others that are coming along may be the prevailing wage may not make it economically feasible to build them anyway. So but all of that is, we're in a brave new world in 2019.
Yes. Thank you for your explanation.
Thank you. Thanks for calling. We appreciate it. We appreciate the emails we get from you too. You're very helpful to help us know what we should talk about.
Yeah. Well, I'm always things that you talk about at City Council give me inspiration. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. We appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
There's 2 calls on hold, so one will ring through.
Does it ring through? Do I have to?
I think yes, it rings up.
Hello, you're on the air. Thank you for calling.
Mayor Morris and Blaine Michaels, this is Marcella Sewell. Nice to talk to you guys again. Well, you're right. Years ago on Calora Street and Nubia Street, they were thinking about buying out all these houses because when the factory came up across the street on Acacia, they had all my parents and the kids' parents when we were going to school come to a meeting because when they tore down the Colonia and built the apartments, the government and the city of San Dimas was thinking about buying up all the houses on Calora Street and Nubia Street, but it didn't go through. So you're right. They could come in and change things and assess things when they get ready, when it's the government involved. You know, when they need public housing and things like that, Mayor Morris. So
one of the things that does help is they have a difficult time using eminent domain to take the property. Because a few years ago we had for economic development, for example, you can't use the condemnation of single family houses, and that may apply even to all these things that the state may be trying to do. So that may still protect the single family houses that are already built. But you're right, that was always a concern, that somebody could come in and for some better good take your house.
You buy up these 2 streets. You buy up Calora and Nubia Street. That happened years ago to my parents, and they had to go to a meeting about it. So you're right, because that's when they were moving the Colonia out, those adobe houses out, and they put in the apartments, and so they were thinking about buying Calora and Nubia Street along with it. many, many moons ago, you know.
I will say, in
So-
all the time that I've been on the city council, we've had a policy, even back when we could maybe legally condemn property to buy it with eminent domain. We always had a policy, we would not take that action for single-family homes. That's
Thank
just,
you, Mayor Morris.
that's
Thank
just
you.
not
Yeah.
a good thing to do.
Yeah. The other thing is everybody's concerned about the hotel coming on the land that's empty, you know. Well, you know, if people want to, you know, complain and they don't want a four-story hotel, maybe the government can use that land and put some public housing on it or something like that, you know,
Well-
more low-income housing on that property, you know.
That is a concern, that if that property is vacant and somebody wants to do that, if that bill passes, even with the one with the SB 35, we have a little more to protect us, but if they pass those laws, having it, you're always vulnerable if you have vacant land that qualifies for the law. So
Right.
I've had two concerns in this deal. One, the hotel is a quality hotel. I mean, we would not want a hotel that
Got
was
that
not
right.
quality.
Those Marriott,
Nice,
those Marriott
it's
hotels are
yeah.
the best.
Quality hotel produces a lot of revenue, produces more revenue to the city than any other use that could be on that property. It's a low traffic impact use. So it's from a business economics for the city's tax base, that's great. But in addition to that, it protects from that property becoming a very dense apartments with at least part, and it's kind of unfair to assume that all low to moderate income housing creates problems, because it does not. But people assume that, and if they think that is the case, we're at risk of that happening. But if people could build 4 or 5 story, and it wouldn't be one building, there would be several buildings there because of the density they could use, and the fact that they don't have to have very much parking under that SB 50 rules as they've been proposed. So I think there's risk, but I think there's a positive benefit that
Well,
the
I
city
agree
was
with
going to
you.
need that
I'd
money.
like another. Yeah, the city's going to need more, tax revenue. But another idea is, this is just an idea. Put an ice skating rink there. Since the bowling alley's already there, if people were like bickering over, what should be there. This is just my personal opinion. Not that my opinion matters,
Yeah,
but it's
it
just an
does
idea
matter.
since there's so many kids. Because there's so many kids here in this community and teenagers and things like that, because of the skate park does so well, they could bring in the ice skating rink and stop all the,
We actually spent a couple of years working with a person who wanted to build an ice skating facility there, and it was going to be quite a deal. It would have 2 rinks that would be big enough for minor league hockey teams to practice on, things like that, and it would include a restaurant inside. It would look down over, and it had all kinds of things. And the person who was doing it, who was trying to put it together, was a very knowledgeable person, but in the end, he could not get the financing. And we worked with him for at least 2 years, I believe. And the use would have been I think, was a popular use, but he just could not get the financing to do it.
Yeah, because it costs money to build those things.
Well, and they're
'cause
single.
They got one in Covina. Yeah.
And they're single-purpose buildings, and banks are just real leery, and so you have to come up. He was trying to do limited partnerships who would have the equity in it, and then they were going to be able to borrow some part of it. And in the days of redevelopment, for a good development that you looked at and thought this is positive for the community, you could even discount the value of the land somewhat in selling it to them for the development if they did certain things. But even with that, he was just never able to get the equity partners or the or the financing that worked, and he worked at it diligently, and he was a knowledgeable guy.
Yes.
It must have been at least 2 years, I think.
Was. In 2 phases, Ron
Wow.
Carlson.
Yeah.
He worked really hard.
Yeah, so that would have been a great use.
It sure would have, But anyway, Mayor Morris, thank you for your guys' time, and I appreciate, you let me know about the eminent domain of the property on Calora and Nubia years ago. That stuff can happen. Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, we're ready. We did have a caller on hold. Maybe they'll call back because the lines are open.
We appreciate those calls. It's always good to have calls. We were talking about the goal line. The original bids came in $500 million higher than they had expected. So their plan was to only build as much of the rail system as they had money to build, which meant that they could only go to Laverne instead of all the way to Montclair. And so that was announced in just about Christmas time. And so they said, we're going to do that. We have to go through an environmental review process to analyze that. And then in the last several weeks, they've tried to work hard to come up with $90 million that they feel would allow them to also go from Laverne to Pomona. So that's where we are today. And then with the commitment to try and do the other millions of dollars needed to eventually get to Montclair. So the $90 million was prescribed to come from a couple of sources. Cutting back the project a little bit. They call it value engineering, which is like buying fewer trains or charging less for some of their inspection services. But $50 million of the 90 was intended to come from local monies. When Measure M was passed by the voters in 2016, it allowed a portion of the 17% of the money to go back to the cities for them to use for street maintenance, which was one of the promises of Measure M, is to help so that money would be available to maintain the streets. And that was bringing $500,000 to San Dimas, and that's about what we pay on an annual basis to do street slurring and street maintenance. Our total street project money is like $3 million, but $500,000 is a very important part. And so their proposal is that $50 million would come from cities giving up, a portion of their own money for 35 years to create the $50 million to go from Laverne to Pomona. So in our case, we would be giving up, we calculated $100,000, but their words would indicate that it would be all transportation revenues, and there are 3 other sources. So it'd be more like $300,000 a year from the city's street and road maintenance fund to instead go toward taking the train from Laverne to Pomona. So our discussions this week, our letters to the Metro Board this week are challenging that particular financing plan. And so some of the board members on Metro say they're listening to us, and I think they are. And so their plan and proposal is not to use local funds, city monies, but to ask the state for an appropriation of funds to be able to make up the difference so they could go to Pomona. The legislators have already provided $250 million in the middle of the summer last year to be able to get the project this far. And so there are some that think that the state probably doesn't have the money, or they'll say, look, we already gave you $250 million. We're not in a position to fund any more. But nonetheless, the current proposal of 3 of the board members from Metro is to try and pursue that.
It is very interesting that the reason that they have to do the flyover Bonita and Cataract is based on an estimate of the goal line of how many trains they would be running in 2036. And their estimate was that there would be a train running through that intersection every 5 minutes. I'm not sure if it's every 5 minutes in each direction, or if it just that the train would be blocked at least every 5 minutes.
That's it, yeah.
So now they're not going to buy that many cars. So you know, they maneuver the numbers, but if they're not going to have that much in 2036, or if it's not reasonable, then maybe they should rethink that the Great Wall of China that's going to go right through San Dimas. Whether they ever will or not, but the PUC, who has final control, they have said, oh no, that intersection will be so impacted. The models would show that if it's at the surface, it might be impacted to the point that the cars would be backed up to the intersection of San Dimas Avenue and Bonita, which I sort of have the feeling if that were the case, people would take an alternate route and take Arrow Highway. But that's the PUC's thing, and by far the worst impact of this to San Dimas is that wall. You can't even imagine if you drew it on anything. It's just going to be the defining characteristic of San Dimas. Not good.
For folks to have the reference point, there is a telephone pole on the southeast corner of the Bonita Cataract intersection. That tape, I think it's yellow or red, I should go check, but that tape that's around the pole would be the height of the crest of the bridge at that point. So, yeah, I'll give you a warning, it's close to the top of the pole.
Yeah, very close to the top. So, that has just a really negative impact. And they virtually did no environmental work on that at all to consider how bad that would be. It's like it's the only place the rail can go. That's going to be a bad intersection. But I think if they're going to buy fewer cars, if that's one of the solutions, we ought to say that means you're not going to have the ridership that you were anticipating. So let's take another look at that bridge. Think we have a chance with that?
Well, part of it is
No.
when you look at the budget for the project, it's one thing to have a budget to construct. This is just the railroad, rails and bridges and things. But about, I'm trying to remember, it's like or $300 million of the project cost was purchase of things that Metro would use or cost that Metro would apply to the project over and above what it cost just to construct it. So they were kind of using the project to pay for other Metro things. It could have been that they were using the project to pay for more cars than that project needed, so they could have them available for some other place, or to reduce other cars that they have on other lines that they haven't set aside the money for. So, but it was a big part of the project, expense-wise, was Metro's laundry list of things they were shopping for.
So they want us to pay for their,
Yeah.
okay. Well, you can see we have a jaundiced eye from having dealt with these folks for a long time. So that covers the latest that we know about where the Metro, or where that,
Right.
So we don't know, but they also have to do another environmental impact report for wherever it's going to stop.
Right, and so because the end of the train was supposed to be Montclair, that the environmental study of the impact of the project is as if that were occurring. So if the end of the project is Laverne, then it means it will be a terminus station. So what will the parking be, the traffic impacts, because that will be the end of the line or the beginning of the line. And I think San Dimas has some interest in that too, because we're next to the beginning or the end of the line. And what about our impacts with our traffic? So that we commented on all of the things we could think of things to study with that particular proposal, and turned that letter in the first part of this month. And so that environmental review process goes through till about April with the comment period. Then they will issue their comments to the comments. And so sometime in June will be the hearings to certify or to deal with those recognized impacts with a revised environmental impact report certification. But the environmental report is coming out like if the station ends at Laverne, or if it ends at Pomona, or if it goes on to Claremont. The reason why they have so many ors in there is because if they do get additional funds, they want to go as far as they can. So they pick up another 90 million, then all of a sudden Pomona will be the last station or the first station. If they can get state monies between now and the next 4 years, that may be enough time to have the contractor stay on the job and go through Claremont to Montclair. So it's,
You know, I think the point that is illustrated by their bids being a lot more than they anticipated, that is happening to our bids for Public Works also. We, as a part of approving a Public Works project, there is a methodology to estimate what the bids would come in at. And it's based on historical data instead of you can't project forward and say we would expect it to be higher because of various factors. So for a while during the recession, bids were coming in very low. In fact, we did the work here at the City Hall way under what we thought it would cost. Our estimate based on what prices were before the recession, and we built this during the recession. But now we're on the other end of that. Almost every single contract we have, that everything that goes out to bid comes in being higher. In fact, I can't recall
right,
one recently that has been at or below the
right. And,
estimate.
you know, it's the cost of raw materials, but the other thing is there's a lot of work to be done. And so there are fewer contractors than there have been in the past. And so those contractors are busier. And so it's kind of a different kind of influence on overall the cost that we're seeing. And the cost of materials is inconsistent because if you have steel in your project, and of course if it's within the next 12 months, you can kind of get a pricing for that. But if you're looking for steel 4 years from now, you're going to leave a lot of room in your bid to be able to make sure you can buy that steel at some point in the future, because it could be very, very expensive in the future.
Just another example of the challenges that all cities are facing, all government entities are facing with relatively static revenue and costs going up in everything we do.
We just received an email question.
Okay, sure.
The question with respect to the closed session at the City Council meeting this week. And the question was the property sold? And the next question, if the same property was a park, would it be subject to proposed AB 50?
Well, I can tell you one of the things, if it were a park, it would not be. And if we, maybe knowing what we know now, maybe when redevelopment died, well, let me say, we had suggestions to include that property in the park that's there. We looked at that several years ago. Some council members were very opposed to doing that. They said we had a lot of problems at Pioneer Park, and that to increase, that was not a good place to spend park money. But now, if we wanted to buy that, we would have to buy it at its current value, which is it 20, 19, 20, $22
It's just
a square
under
foot?
it's just under 20 a foot, which would be $4 million to buy the entire site.
Yeah, so we don't have in park budget money or any other budget money, we don't have the ability to do that. If it were, but if we had done it in the past as parks, it's almost impossible to sell parkland for development. You have to go through lots of hoops and you have to show all kinds of necessity. Parklands are very well protected. So it would not, if it were a park, the property has not been sold. We can't sell the property in a closed session. Everything related to the sale of the property has to be done in open session. Hello, you're on the air. Thank you for calling.
Mayor Morris, I want to thank you guys for, speaking of Pioneer Park, I want to thank you guys for, getting ready to set up cameras, because that's the best thing that could ever happen to that park. Make it more safer for everybody,
Yeah, we need to do that, and I think that will be coming very soon.
Thank you very much, Mayor Morris and Blaine Michaelis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that answers the question that the closed session, you simply can't you can't make decisions to sell or anything else. Property is still not sold. It is it's subject to I think they still call them DDAs, even though
Right.
that's a development and disposition agreement, even though redevelopment is long gone. But that's the status of, I think that Mr. Michaelis is probably going to be bringing to the city council at the next meeting some suggestions on one of the things we want to do is have a public meeting so we can make sure that everybody has the same information about that. And I don't know when that will be scheduled, but we're working on, some of the things we want to do, the city council wants to do is do that. But in order to do that, it has to come to the city council with a proposal from Mr. Michaelis as to what we might do, and the city council will have to debate the issues and make the decision at the next city council meeting. Is that
Right.
correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Let's see, maybe I had to cover something else unless the caller has a question.
Why don't we do that?
I had a meeting today with a representative of the 2020 census. Every 10 years, there's a count of people nationwide. It affects us as a community. And the intent is to be able to count the people who live in the community and live in a state and live in the nation. It's required to be completed, but what it does is those numbers, the population, there's a good amount of governmental resources that are distributed based upon the number of people that either live in a state or a city or a county. In fact, George Washington University did a study and found that almost $2,000 per person on an annual basis is distributed by the federal government in various forms of services. And so because it's distributed by population only, then what it means is if you're not counted, then that state or city or county you're not part of the census, then that state, city, or county would not get those funds that are allocated to them. So the federal government distributes $2,000 equivalent per person, but almost all of our gas tax funds that come to San Dimas are distributed per capita. In other words, we have 34,000 people, we're going to get $200 per person. If we miscount in San Dimas and there's 4,000 people that are not counted, then we would not receive those funds, even though our population is greater than what was reported in the census.
For the next 10 years.
For the next 10 years.
Is like the internet sales that's being taxed now that comes to the state fund, that part of the sales is it distributed per capita rather than by point of sale?
It is distributed according to your proportion of the pool. So we are pooled with Los Angeles County, and frankly, I know this, we are 1% of LA County's sales tax pool. So internet sales that go into the pool, we will get our share is 1% of that sales tax. But I think the point of the census is it's very important that we know that we have an accurate count. Now, there's lots of reasons why people are hesitant. The form itself, the questions are probably 50 questions. And some of them feel like they're kind of personal, like how many people live in your home? What is your income? How far do you drive to work? And so that's the other thing that the government does. They try and learn a lot about society, so it helps them in their planning. And so there are just several questions. Some may be hesitant to answer how many people really live in a home because, for example, let's say this, it's you and your spouse and your parents are living with you in the same home, and your son and his family and their children are just living at home temporarily, maybe longer than temporarily, to get on their feet. So you feel like you may not want to list how many people are in your house because it'll get you in trouble. We've got 4 generations of people living in my house and it's a single family home, and so I'm just going to report that it's my wife and I, or I'm not going to report the total number of people. So I'd like to let people, the information that we provide, even though it feels personal, is all going to just be statistical. In other words, it won't be, by your residence. They will pick it up that way, but it won't be tied to your residence. It won't be separated out to identify you in particular. It all goes into a pool of information. But on the other hand, if there's 8 people in your home, which is just fine, and then those 8 people, if they're counted in the census, then they would count for 8 of those people living in San Dimas, and so the money that we would receive on population would reflect the more accurate reporting. They did another study and found that small children, some are hesitant to list their kids. Say, well, they're just children. They're not adults. They're not teenagers. They're not in college. 1 million 5-year-olds or less were skipped in the last census in 2010 for whatever reason. So 1 million in the population was not counted. So the meeting I had today was just to let people know the census is coming. It's important to participate in a full way. The census actually will be conducted on April 1st of 2020. So it's not like it'll be a year from now. But they're trying to make it as easy as possible. So you can go online and answer the 50 questions and provide the information. Or you can if you're uncomfortable with the computer, you can call a number and then they'll interview you to collect the information. Or you can fill out the form itself and mail it in. Or if you don't mail it in, they'll stop by your home and say, we haven't heard from you. And it's not to be belligerent, it's just that the count is so important for what it means for the distribution of money or information, but how it helps, the government. Like, it's very helpful economic development-wise to know, what the income and the population base is in a particular community. So it's just really an encouragement that it's coming and to answer them completely, those questions when they come.
There are a lot of programs that are based on census tracts that income and kind of various things that are done. I believe that the original document, the original information can be used only for the census.
Correct.
They can use the statistical information for other things, and they have to keep that for 50 years. But if you go back, and it's very interesting to look back, like in the 1800s or something, if you could get a page from the census, if somebody has happened to give you one regarding your family or something, because you find that,
right.
and when you can look at it every 10 years, you can see, a lot of children died in those years because there would be a child, and then in the next census that child wouldn't be there anymore,
right.
and it wouldn't have been because they were old enough to have been out of the home. So it is really important. I really do believe there was a substantial undercount in San Dimas.
Actually, our count, from the 10 years before, were flat at best, and in some cases, kind of a decline in population. Yeah. And I know San Dimas is changing, but there is a feeling that in 10 years, the San Dimas population really isn't flat or declining. So we hope that you'll respond when that information comes.
And they do revisions of the census data, but they don't do the census thing anymore. And they do that sort of on projections, kind of things. And it's having a really good base count is very helpful.
Right, it is, and I hope that the folks feel very comfortable. It is anonymous, it is confidential, and it has a specific purpose. So feel free to respond to those questions as you see fit. The other thing that the gentleman shared with me was there may be a concern with respect to immigration or your immigration status. The census doesn't care. They're there to collect the number of people. And so there may be some hesitancy, or maybe it's a philosophical difference you have with it all, but the census doesn't care.
Hello, you're on the air. Thank you for calling.
Mayor Morris, this is for you, because you were born, you were raised here in San Dimas.
Yes.
My question to you is, in 1959, before San Dimas became San Dimas, how many citizens were living in San Dimas? I was only 1 year old when I moved here.
I don't know for sure. And I actually, I lived in San Dimas from the time I moved here. I was here, until 1954 when I went away to college. And when I went to college, I was in the Navy. They were paying for my education, and so every summer I had to be a sailor. I was a midshipman.
Thank you for serving our country.
And I had to go on cruises, so then I didn't actually, and then I had to go on active duty, so I didn't actually return here to spend a whole lot of time until 1961, actually the middle of the year. So I was not here during the time of and I don't remember exactly what the population was, but it was about 1,800 in 1940. 1950 was not a whole lot more, but I think I just don't know, but I doubt it was as much as 10,000 in 1960.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. That's not all that was given here,
Marcel, in the mayor's office, there's a sign. It's a city limit sign, and I think it was posted in 1963. If I remember, there were 7,000 population in 1963. So that's close to the date you're looking at. And the other thing is we had an employee that was married in the Holy Name of Mary Church in 1963, and she's right near that sign. So that's why I'm associating 1963 with that. And so, so I think it was around 7,000 at that point.
So it was a real small little town. I used to.
it was still Mud Springs when I moved here. It wasn't even San Dimas yet.
I used to go. I went to high school at where Damien is, and I would like football practice or something. It'd be a little bit dark. You could always get a ride to the corner of San Dimas Avenue and Bonita, but I lived about 2 miles from there, and it was. The one stretch was on Baseline between San Dimas Avenue and Amelia Avenue, and there was not a single house. It was the darkest place you can imagine, and I would walk that way, and there wouldn't be a car go either way. I mean, it was way out in the country. So
yes, the Cowdies used to come up to our front door here on Colora Street, because we had a Cowdy den right across the street, so thank you for that information, guys. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Actually, with technology, the 1970 population of San Dimas was 15,692. And then the population from 2000 to 2010 dropped 4.6%. 35,000 down to 33,300. And that was from 2000 to 2010.
Do you have the 1960?
No, it only gives, it starts in 1970, so
okay.
I wish, let me keep.
So we had 15 then.
Yeah, so maybe it's in here somewhere. It doesn't look, wait. Oh, yeah, at least on the internet, it's just to 1970.
There was very little in a way of construction in San Dimas, I think, between 1930 and 1950. In the way of houses, not many at all. Well, if anybody would like to call, you still have an opportunity. Blaine still has things on his list, however, so he can tell us something else.
Let me do this in an abbreviated way, because we can talk more about it later, but we have just a few minutes. 25 years ago this month was the Northridge earthquake. And 2 months ago, we had a nice little shaker with an epicenter in North Laverne. Now, all of us have had earthquakes far, but that one in Laverne was I've never been so close to an epicenter before, and it was a pretty good pop.
You were close.
Yeah, and so it was really interesting to see what it felt like when you're close. And then that was a 4.1 in Laverne, and there were 3 aftershocks, all of them over 3. And then, I don't know if people realize, but that continued to rumble almost every day for about a month and a half. We just didn't feel it. That same fault, that same area. So it's okay to start to remember that, well, that was nice, it's done. But emergency or preparedness is really a good thing. And I wanted to give folks a reference point. And again, we'll talk more later. There is a website called ready.gov, and it's that simple, ready.gov. ready.gov. We have the link on the city's webpage. If you go on the city's webpage and do emergency preparedness in the search bar, it will come up with this reference. But it is an excellent summary of things that you need to focus on or things that would help you to be able to look at all the facets of being prepared for an emergency. And the other thing I'd offer is we think about the big one or the big major, like a fire or a flood or an earthquake. You know, those things are what we need to be prepared for. But there are other emergencies that happen a lot more frequently, like power outages or a health issue in your family or a financial emergency. And in a way, if you prepare for those almost routine or expected emergencies, it helps you to be more prepared for the bigger ones that will last longer, more days, or even a week. And so I guess I'm just trying to sell the point that it's great to be ready for a major event, and that would mean being on your own for 2 weeks, maybe, 30 days at least. But it also helps you with some of the other things that will just normally happen in life. If you've got the resources and the medicine and the plan of what to do if there's a major health issue, how you'd handle that, it's not too far different than if you're planning to how you would handle just a major catastrophe in our area and region. So, but I would encourage folks to take a look at ready.gov. It's an interactive process to just kind of walk through to make sure that you're as prepared as you can.
Ready.gov, how can it be easier?
Ready.gov. It's in it.
Thanks.
But there's the caveat to that is there's a line on top of that today that says because of the government slowdown, they're not monitoring the website as much as they normally would. But it still is a very good site.
I went on Friday night. They had a little celebration at San Dimas High School. It was in celebration of the year that the San Dimas High School won the CIF championship for the Southern, and they actually played in a game, in a state playoff game. May have played in two, but the one that I really recall is there was a player on the other team who went from there to the NBA. But it was really a nice event. They had at the gym and during a basketball game that was okay too. But Coach Preston, who coached forever, and he was the coach then, and they had most of the team was there. And Rita Kerr would care when she talked about the players. She didn't by names, but she described some of the things that they're doing, and they have been successful in life. One, DJ Hackett, who was the star of the team, played in the NBA. Didn't play football at San Dimas. Played in the NBA. It was a defensive back, as I recall. Played at Seattle, maybe some other place. But then these guys they got down on the basketball court and they were doing some kind of a shoot around. Just having a great time, all getting back together. But it was really a great event. They had some coaches who were here then, all of whom are with other places and are retired. And it was great for Coach Preston because he really was. San Dimas basketball in the years that he was the coach, you could always count on whoever those players were. And of course, San Dimas doesn't recruit like some places, but they were always teams that played.
Yeah.
They played defense. They did everything. One of the guys told me, he said when you were taking a shot, and it was a place where you really maybe aren't supposed to take the shot, or a guy's hand is in your face, if you miss, you're going to be on the bench.
Yeah.
He said, that coach wanted you to do what you were supposed to do. But it was a really great event, and it makes, San Dimas is a great small town, and the school district and our relationship with the school district is great. Yeah. And it just, when you go to little events like that, the stands on the San Dimas side were full. I've never seen that many people there.
That's great.
But it really was good.
Well, what an honor for the coach and the team.
But the basketball game before that, the week before, I went to that game too. And at the very end, the other team scored a 3-point. So they went ahead by 2 points maybe. And there were just barely seconds left. San Dimas guy goes down, takes a long 3-pointer, scores.
Oh my.
San Dimas wins by 1. It's like, I was watching the principal, and the principal is, he supports the team. And it was like, and then the guy, it was,
Wow.
but San Dimas High School basketball is a lot of fun. So if any of you think some evening you could check on the website find out when they're playing at home. It's worth going to see these kids and to see. They also have the cheer teams. I mean, the cheer team is huge, and at the halftime they do stunts that you wouldn't believe. So it's
Wow. How fun.
just one of the great things about small town San Dimas.
Yeah,
And I presume we're through.
we're through.